The blood drained from Alexander Reed's face as he stared at the white bedsheet. A small crimson stain marked the center of it, innocent yet damning. His hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the bed, his mind racing with implications. How could this be? He had just spent the night with his contract wife of 3 days, a woman he had married purely for business reasons, and now this revelation threatened to shatter the carefully constructed walls around his heart. "Olivia?" he called out, his voice echoing through the massive penthouse. The sound of running water from the bathroom stopped abruptly. Alexander paced back and forth, his expensive suit feeling suddenly too tight around his neck. This wasn't part of the deal. This wasn't what he had signed up for. The marriage was supposed to be simple, a business arrangement to satisfy his grandfather's will, which required him to be married for 80 days before he could inherit the company. He had chosen Olivia Thompson precisely because she seemed practical, independent, and unlikely to develop feelings. She was supposed to be experienced in life, a 28-year-old woman with a struggling bakery who needed the money he offered. But now this. The bathroom door opened slowly, revealing Olivia wrapped in a plush white robe, her damp brown hair cascading over her shoulders. Her eyes, a warm shade of amber, refused to meet his. A faint blush colored her cheeks as she stood frozen in the doorway. "Were you a virgin?" The words tumbled from Alexander's lips before he could stop them, harsher than he intended. Olivia's eyes widened, then she lifted her chin defiantly. "Does it matter?" "Matter? Of course it matters." Alexander ran his fingers through his dark hair, messing up the perfectly styled look his image consultant had worked on just an hour ago. "Why didn't you tell me?" "You never asked." Olivia's voice was quiet but steady. "The contract only specified marriage for 80 days. It never mentioned anything about my past relationships or experience." Alexander stared at her in disbelief. She was right technically. The thick contract his lawyers had drawn up covered every possible angle of their arrangement: how they would appear in public, the monthly payment she would receive, the non-disclosure agreement after their divorce. But he had never thought to ask about something so personal. "I wouldn't have." He started, then stopped abruptly. "You wouldn't have what? Married me? Or slept with me?" Olivia asked, her voice cracking slightly despite her attempt to appear strong. Alexander looked at the petite woman before him, really seeing her for the first time. When his assistant had presented several candidates for this arrangement, he had chosen Olivia because she seemed the most sensible. Her file indicated she owned a small bakery that was struggling financially. The marriage would give her enough money to save her business and give him the temporary wife he needed. It had seemed perfect. "I would have been more careful," he finally said, his voice softer. "I would have made it special for you." Olivia's laugh held no humor. "Special? This is a business deal, Mr. Reed. You made that very clear when you had me sign a contract thicker than a phone book. There's nothing special about it." Her words stung more than they should have. Alexander straightened his tie and checked his watch, a habit he had developed over years of high-pressure business meetings. "I have a board meeting in 30 minutes. We'll discuss this later." He grabbed his briefcase from the chair by the window, needing to escape the suddenly charged atmosphere of the penthouse. "There's nothing to discuss," Olivia called after him as he headed for the door. "I fulfilled my part of the contract. What happened last night doesn't change our agreement." Alexander paused at the door, his hand on the knob. "Everything has changed, Olivia," he said without turning around, "whether you want to admit it or not." As the door closed behind him, Alexander leaned against the wall of the private elevator, loosening his tie. His mind was racing with thoughts of Olivia, how vulnerable she had looked in his bed last night, how she had trembled beneath his touch, how her eyes had widened with a mix of pain and wonder. He had attributed it all to chemistry, to the natural awkwardness of their first time together. He hadn't realized he was taking something precious from her. The elevator doors opened to the private garage where his driver waited with the car door open. As he slid into the black leather seat, Alexander made a decision. 80 days. He had 77 more days with Olivia Thompson, and he would make every one of them count. This wouldn't be just a cold business arrangement anymore. He would make her feel special, treasured. And maybe, just maybe, he could convince her to make their temporary arrangement permanent. What Alexander didn't know as his car pulled out of the garage and into the bustling New York traffic was that upstairs, Olivia was curled up on the massive bed, silent tears streaming down her face. She hadn't meant for him to find out. She hadn't planned on sleeping with him at all. But last night, when he had returned from work looking exhausted and alone, something had shifted between them. She had only wanted to comfort him. She hadn't expected comfort to turn into passion. And now, everything had changed indeed. 3 weeks earlier, Olivia Thompson had stood in her empty bakery, staring at the final notice from the bank. 3 months behind on her loan, they were threatening to foreclose. The dream she had built from scratch, Sweet Beginnings Bakery, was on the verge of collapse. "There has to be something we can do," her best friend and only employee Zoe had said, perched on a stool behind the counter. "Short of winning the lottery or marrying a millionaire." "I don't think so." Olivia had tried to make it sound like a joke, but her voice cracked. The bell above the door had jingled, and both women looked up, expecting a late customer. Instead, a tall woman in a crisp suit entered, her sharp eyes surveying the quaint bakery with clinical interest. "Olivia Thompson?" the woman asked, approaching the counter. "That's me," Olivia replied, quickly wiping her hands on her apron, suddenly conscious of the flour dusting her clothes. "My name is Rebecca Mills. I represent Alexander Reed of Reed Enterprises." The woman handed Olivia a business card. "Mr. Reed would like to meet with you regarding a potential business proposition." Olivia exchanged a confused glance with Zoe. "I think there's been a mistake. I'm just a small bakery owner. I don't have any business with Reed Enterprises." Rebecca's perfectly shaped eyebrow had risen slightly. "There's no mistake, Miss Thompson. Mr. Reed has selected you specifically. The matter is of a personal nature." She glanced at her sleek watch. "A car will pick you up tomorrow at 9 a.m. Please dress professionally." Before Olivia could protest further, Rebecca handed her an envelope. "This is a good faith payment for your time. Mr. Reed understands you're facing financial difficulties and doesn't want to add to your burden by taking you away from your business." Inside the envelope was a check for $5,000. The next morning, despite Zoe's concerns about organ harvesting rings targeting broke bakers, Olivia had found herself in the back of a luxury car, heading to the Reed Enterprises headquarters in downtown Manhattan. Alexander Reed wasn't what she had expected. From the tabloid headlines she'd occasionally glimpsed at the supermarket checkout, she had imagined someone older, perhaps pompous and definitely intimidating. The man who stood up from behind the massive desk when she entered his office was young, early 30s at most, with intense gray eyes and the kind of face that belonged in a magazine rather than a boardroom. "Miss Thompson, thank you for coming." His voice was deep, confident. "Please have a seat." As she sat across from him, Olivia felt painfully aware of her discount store dress and scuffed shoes. She had done her best to look professional, but sitting in this office with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, she felt woefully out of place. "I'm sure you're wondering why you're here," Alexander began, his expression unreadable. "The thought did cross my mind," Olivia replied, trying to match his businesslike tone despite her racing heart. A ghost of a smile touched his lips before disappearing. "I'll be direct, Miss Thompson. I need a wife." Olivia blinked, certain she had misheard him. "Excuse me?" "A temporary wife," he clarified, sliding a folder across the desk toward her. "For exactly 80 days. As he explained the situation, his grandfather's will, the condition that he be married for 80 days before he could take full control of the company, the approaching deadline for an important merger, Olivia listened with growing disbelief. "Why me?" she finally asked, interrupting his matter-of-fact explanation of how the arrangement would work. Alexander leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You were thoroughly vetted by my team. You have no romantic attachments, no family complications, a clear financial motive, and a reputation for discretion and integrity in your community. In short, Miss Thompson, you're the perfect candidate." The meeting had ended with Alexander offering her $2 million, enough to save her bakery with plenty left over, in exchange for 80 days of her life pretending to be his devoted wife. "Take 24 hours to think about it," he had said as she stood to leave, her mind reeling. "My lawyers will provide the full contract tomorrow." That night, Olivia had paced her tiny apartment above the bakery, weighing her options. $2 million for less than 3 months of her life. Seemed too good to be true. "It's insane," Zoe had insisted when Olivia called her. "But also, kind of amazing? I mean, you'd be saving the bakery." The next day, Olivia had returned to the Reed Enterprises building with her decision. She would do it. For her bakery, for her dream, she would marry a stranger for 80 days. The contract was extensive, covering everything from public appearances to living arrangements to the grounds for nullification. There was even a clause about physical intimacy, not expected or required, but not explicitly prohibited if mutually desired. Olivia had blushed when she read that part, causing the stern-faced lawyer to look away in discomfort. The wedding was a small civil ceremony 3 days later, with only the required witnesses present. Alexander had slipped a stunning diamond ring on her finger. For appearances, he had explained, and just like that, Olivia Thompson became Olivia Reed. She moved into his penthouse that same day, shown to a guest bedroom larger than her entire apartment. "We'll need to share a bedroom when my grandfather visits next week," Alexander had informed her clinically. "But otherwise your privacy will be respected." For the first 3 days they had barely seen each other. Alexander left early for work and returned late. They exchanged polite small talk over breakfast, prepared by his personal chef, and then went their separate ways. Until last night. Alexander had returned home earlier than usual, looking exhausted. Olivia had found him in the living room, tie loosened, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring out at the city lights. "Bad day?" she had asked, hesitating in the doorway. He had turned to look at her, his gray eyes softer than she had ever seen them. "The worst." Something in his vulnerability had pulled her into the room, had made her sit beside him on the couch, had led to them talking, really talking, for the first time. He told her about the pressure of living up to his grandfather's legacy, about losing his parents when he was young, about the loneliness of being at the top. She had told him about her parents who still lived in the small town where she grew up, about her dream of opening a bakery after college instead of pursuing a sensible career, about the joy she found in creating something with her hands that made people happy. Somehow talking had turned to touching. A comforting hand on his arm had led to his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. The next thing Olivia knew, they were kissing, tentatively at first, then with growing hunger. When he had carried her to his bedroom, Olivia hadn't stopped him. She hadn't told him she had never been with anyone before. It had never seemed important in her previous relationships. She had always wanted to wait for someone special, then gotten so busy with her bakery that dating fell by the wayside. And with Alexander, well, it had seemed too embarrassing to admit, too vulnerable a thing to share in what was supposed to be a business arrangement. Now, as she dried her tears and forced herself to get ready for the day, Olivia wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Not just last night but the entire arrangement. How was she supposed to spend the next 77 days living with a man who now looked at her like she was a problem to be solved? A man she was starting to have real feelings for, despite all her best intentions. Alexander couldn't focus during the board meeting. The CFO was presenting quarterly projections, but all Alexander could see was Olivia's face when he had confronted her that morning. The hurt in her eyes, the defiant tilt of her chin, the vulnerability she tried so hard to hide. "Alex? Your thoughts?" His grandfather's voice snapped him back to the present. Gerald Reed, at 78, still commanded the room with his presence. Though he had officially stepped down as CEO 3 years ago, he remained chairman of the board and made it clear that he was watching Alexander's every move. "I think we should proceed with caution," Alexander said smoothly, grateful for his years of practice at appearing composed even when his mind was elsewhere. "The Asian markets are volatile right now." Gerald's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't believe Alexander had been listening, but he wouldn't call him out in front of the board. Later, however, would be a different story. Sure enough, as the meeting concluded and executives filed out, Gerald motioned for Alexander to stay behind. "How's married life treating you, grandson?" Gerald asked once they were alone, his tone deceptively casual. Alexander tensed. "Fine, thank you." "Just fine? You've been married for what, 3 days now? Should still be in the honeymoon phase." Gerald's shrewd eyes studied Alexander's face. "Unless, of course, it's not a real marriage." Alexander kept his expression neutral. "Olivia is a wonderful woman. A baker, right? Not exactly the socialite I expected you to choose." Gerald walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "Interesting timing too, just before the deadline I set in my will." "Grandfather?" Gerald turned, raising a hand to silence him. "I'm not accusing you of anything, Alex. Yet. But I will be watching closely. You know the terms, 80 days of genuine marriage. If I suspect this is just some scheme to get control of the company early, I'll extend the terms to a full year." Alexander's jaw tightened. A year would delay the merger he'd been carefully orchestrating, potentially costing the company millions. "You're invited to dinner on Friday," Gerald continued. "Both of you. I want to get to know my new granddaughter-in-law better." "We'll be there," Alexander replied, knowing he had no choice. Back in his office, Alexander canceled his afternoon meetings and sat at his desk, staring at the framed photo of his parents. They had died in a car accident when he was 12, leaving him in Gerald's care. His grandfather had raised him with one purpose: to take over Reed Enterprises someday. Every decision, every relationship, Every moment of Alexander's life had been shaped toward that goal. Until last night with Olivia. For the first time in years, Alexander had let his guard down. He had told her things he'd never shared with anyone. And when she looked at him with those understanding amber eyes, he had felt seen, not as the CEO of Reed Enterprises, not as Gerald Reed's heir, but simply as himself. Making love to her had been unexpected, unplanned, and absolutely perfect. Her sweet responses to his touch, the way she had trembled in his arms, it all made sense now. Why hadn't he realized she was inexperienced? He should have been gentler, should have made it special for her. Alexander picked up his phone and called his assistant. "Cancel all my appointments for the rest of the day," he instructed. "And I need a few things arranged." By the time Alexander returned to the penthouse that afternoon, everything was in place. He entered quietly, wondering where Olivia might be. The sound of music led him to the kitchen, where he paused in the doorway watching her. Olivia stood at the counter, flour dusting her cheeks, kneading dough with practiced hands. She wore simple jeans and a t-shirt, her hair tied back in a messy ponytail. She was humming along with the music playing from her phone, completely absorbed in her task. She looked beautiful. "I didn't know you baked at home too," Alexander said softly, not wanting to startle her. Olivia looked up, her hands stilling on the dough. "Your chef let me use the kitchen. I hope that's okay. I bake when I'm—" She trailed off, not finishing the sentence. "When you're upset," Alexander completed for her, stepping into the kitchen. "I'm sorry about this morning. I reacted poorly." Olivia wiped her hands on a towel, her expression guarded. "It's fine. Like I said, it doesn't change our agreement." "But it does." Alexander moved closer, stopping when he saw her tense. "Olivia, I would never have taken something so precious if I had known." "It wasn't taken," she said firmly. "I made a choice. I'm a grown woman, Alexander, not some fragile doll." He studied her face, admiring her strength. "You're right. I apologize for making assumptions." He took a deep breath. "My grandfather has invited us to dinner on Friday. He's suspicious about our arrangement." Olivia's eyes widened slightly. "Will he be able to tell it's not real?" "That depends," Alexander said, holding her gaze. "Is it not real?" The question hung between them, loaded with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. Olivia looked away first. "What do you need me to do for the dinner?" Alexander recognized the deflection but didn't push. "Just be yourself. Grandfather appreciates authenticity." He hesitated, then added, "There's something else. I'd like to propose a change to our arrangement." Wariness crept into Olivia's expression. "What kind of change?" "For the next 77 days, I want to court you properly." "Court me?" Olivia repeated, confusion evident in her voice. Alexander nodded, suddenly feeling uncharacteristically nervous. "Date you, get to know you, treat you the way you deserve to be treated." "But why?" "The contract doesn't require that." "Because I want to," Alexander said simply. "Because last night wasn't just physical for me, and I don't think it was for you either." Olivia stared at him, uncertainty and something else, hope perhaps, flickering in her eyes. "What about after the 80 days?" she asked quietly. "Let's see where we are then," Alexander suggested, stepping closer and gently taking her flour-dusted hands in his. "No pressure, no expectations beyond what's in the contract. Just two people getting to know each other honestly." Olivia looked down at their joined hands. "This complicates things." "Life is complicated," Alexander said with a small smile. "Will you say yes? Will you let me court you, Olivia Thompson-Reed?" A small smile tugged at her lips. "You're already my husband. Isn't this backward? We've done everything backward so far. Why stop now?" Olivia laughed then, a genuine sound that made Alexander's heart lighten. "Okay," she agreed. "But no extravagant gifts or over-the-top gestures. I'm still me, Alexander. I don't need to be impressed with money." "Noted," he said, then glanced at his watch. "Our first date starts in 1 hour. Dress casually." Surprise flashed across her face. "You've already planned it?" Alexander smiled mysteriously. "I'll meet you in the lobby at 6. When Olivia came downstairs an hour later, wearing jeans, a simple blouse and light makeup, she found Alexander waiting by the elevator, similarly dressed down in jeans and a Henley shirt that showed off his athletic build. It was the first time she had seen him in anything other than a suit, and the change was startling. "Where are we going?" she asked as they rode the elevator down. "You'll see." Instead of the usual black town car, a simple Honda was parked at the curb, with Alexander opening the passenger door for her. "You drive." Olivia asked, unable to hide her surprise. Alexander laughed. I do have a driver's license, yes. I just don't use it much in the city. As they drove out of Manhattan and across the bridge into Brooklyn, Olivia's curiosity grew. Finally, Alexander parked in front of a small, unassuming building with a faded sign reading Antonio's Pizzeria. Best pizza in New York, Alexander explained as he opened her door. My father used to bring me here when I was a kid. It was our secret. No business meetings, no talk about the company, just father and son having pizza. Olivia felt touched that he was sharing something so personal with her. Inside, the pizzeria was warm and smelled of tomato sauce and freshly baked dough. An elderly man looked up from behind the counter and broke into a wide smile. Alexander Reed. I don't believe my eyes. He came around the counter to embrace Alexander warmly. It's been years, boy. Too many years, Antonio, Alexander agreed, returning the hug. This is Olivia, my wife. Antonio's eyebrows shot up. Wife? The tabloids didn't mention this. We've kept it quiet, Alexander said with a wink. Can we have the usual table? Antonio led them to a small booth in the back, away from the few other customers. The usual? He asked. Alexander looked at Olivia questioningly. I trust your judgment, she said with a smile. After Antonio left, Alexander reached across the table to take Olivia's hand. Thank you for agreeing to this. To pizza? It wasn't exactly a hard sell, she teased, but her expression grew serious. Why are you doing this, Alexander? Really? He was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. Because when I'm with you, I feel like myself. Not the CEO, not the heir, just me. He met her eyes. I haven't felt that way in a very long time. Olivia squeezed his hand, understanding exactly what he meant. For the first time since signing the contract, she allowed herself to wonder if maybe, just maybe, this arranged marriage could turn into something real. Friday evening arrived too quickly for Olivia's comfort. Standing in front of the mirror in the massive walk-in closet adjoining the master bedroom, she smoothed down the front of her navy blue dress for the 10th time. You look beautiful, Alexander said from the doorway, his eyes warm as they traveled over her. Grandfather will be impressed. I'm not trying to impress him, Olivia replied, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. Despite their agreement to see where things led naturally between them, the contract was still in place. If Gerald Reed deemed their marriage a sham, everything would fall apart. Alexander crossed the room to stand behind her, their eyes meeting in the mirror. Just be yourself. That's more than enough to impress anyone. The simple compliment warmed her from within. Since their pizza date 3 days ago, Alexander had kept his word about courting her. He'd come home early each evening and they'd spend time together talking, watching movies and just getting to know each other. Last night, he had brought home ingredients and they had baked together in the kitchen, laughing as he proved himself completely hopeless at following even the simplest recipe. There had been no pressure for physical intimacy, though the awareness of it hummed between them like a live wire. Alexander had kissed her goodnight each evening, sweet kisses that left her wanting more but respecting her need for time. The car ride to Gerald Reed's mansion in the Hamptons was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts. As they pulled up the long driveway, Olivia gasped at the sheer size of the estate. This is where you grew up? She asked, taking in the sprawling property. Alexander nodded, his expression difficult to read. After my parents died, yes. Olivia reached for his hand instinctively, giving it a squeeze. The small gesture of support seemed to fortify him as the car came to a stop in front of the grand entrance. Gerald Reed was waiting for them in the foyer, an imposing figure even in casual evening attire. His sharp eyes missed nothing as he studied Olivia. So you're the baker who captured my grandson's heart, he said without preamble. Rather suddenly, I might add. Grandfather, Alexander's voice held a warning note, but Olivia squeezed his hand again. Sometimes the heart knows what it wants, she said, meeting the old man's gaze steadily. Even when the timing seems suspicious. Gerald's stern expression cracked slightly, a grudging respect entering his eyes. Direct. I like that. He turned and led them through the house to a formal dining room where a table was set for 3. I hope you like seafood, Olivia. The chef has prepared his specialty. Dinner was an elaborate affair, each course more impressive than the last. Throughout the meal, Gerald peppered Olivia with questions about her background, her bakery, and how she had met Alexander. They had prepared for this, crafting a story about meeting at a charity event 6 months earlier and keeping their relationship private until they were certain of their feelings. It was close enough to the truth of their arrangement to be believable, yet far enough to satisfy the terms of Gerald's will. And what are your plans for children? Gerald asked bluntly as dessert was served. Olivia nearly choked on her wine, and Alexander stiffened beside her. We haven't discussed that yet, Alexander answered for them, his tone making it clear the subject was closed. Gerald's eyes narrowed. Most couples talk about these things before marriage. Most couples don't have a grandfather trying to control their lives, Alexander shot back, his voice tight with tension. Alex, Olivia placed her hand on his arm, feeling the muscles bunched beneath his suit jacket. It's a fair question. She turned to Gerald. We both want children eventually, but right now we're focused on getting to know each other as husband and wife. These first months of marriage are precious, and we want to cherish them before expanding our family. Her answer seemed to satisfy Gerald, who nodded thoughtfully before changing the subject to business matters. Later, as Alexander gave her a tour of the house, Olivia sensed his growing unease. She waited until they were alone in the garden under the stars to broach the subject. This place holds difficult memories for you, she observed quietly. Alexander sighed, leading her to a stone bench near a small fountain. After my parents died, I came to live here. Grandfather did his best, but he's not exactly the nurturing type. This house was always more like a boarding school than a home. I'm sorry, Olivia said, truly meaning it. She couldn't imagine growing up in such a cold, formal environment, especially after losing both parents. Don't be, Alexander replied, turning to face her. I had every material advantage a child could want. Private tutors, the best schools, vacations around the world. But no one to tuck you in at night, Olivia said softly, seeing the lonely child beneath the successful man. Something in Alexander's expression changed, a vulnerability she had glimpsed only briefly before now fully visible. You see me too clearly, Olivia. It's unsettling. Is it? She asked, reaching up to touch his cheek gently. Yes, he whispered, leaning into her touch. And wonderful. When he kissed her, there beneath the stars in the garden of his childhood home, Olivia felt something shift between them. This wasn't just attraction or chemistry, this was something deeper, something that scared and thrilled her in equal measure. The drive back to the city was quiet again, but a different kind of quiet. Intimate, charged with unspoken feelings. When they arrived at the penthouse, Alexander walked her to her bedroom door. I think we passed the test, he said, his voice low. Grandfather seemed to believe our story. Good, Olivia replied, though at that moment, the contract and Gerald's approval seemed distant concerns compared to the way Alexander was looking at her. Olivia, his voice was hesitant, may I kiss you good night? She smiled at the formal request. You've kissed me good night every night this week, Alexander. This feels different, he admitted. And it was. When his lips met hers, there was a new tenderness, a depth of feeling that hadn't been there before. As the kiss deepened, Olivia felt herself melting against him, her hands sliding up to tangle in his hair. Alexander was the one who pulled back first, his breathing uneven. We should stop, he said, though his eyes told a different story. Why? Olivia asked, her heart pounding. Because I want to do this right, he explained, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I want to prove that this isn't just about the physical between us. Olivia nodded, understanding his need to prove himself, to prove that what was growing between them was real. Good night then, she whispered, pressing one more quick kiss to his lips before slipping into her room. As she leaned against the closed door, Olivia admitted to herself what she had been trying to deny for days. She was falling in love with her contract husband. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she found herself smiling as she got ready for bed, replaying every moment of the evening in her mind, especially those quiet moments in the garden. What she didn't know was that Alexander stood outside her door for a long time after she closed it, wrestling with the same realization, that what had started as a business arrangement was turning into the most real thing he had ever felt. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of discovery for Olivia and Alexander. True to his word, Alexander continued to court her, dedicating his evenings and weekends to showing her sides of himself that few people ever saw. He took her sailing on the Hudson, laughing as she squealed when the small boat tilted with the wind. He brought her to a hidden jazz club downtown where they danced until midnight, her head resting against his chest as they swayed to the music. He even spent a Sunday helping at her bakery, covered in flour and hopelessly tangling dough as Zoe watched with undisguised amusement. You really love him, don't you? Zoe asked quietly one afternoon as they closed up the bakery, nodding toward Alexander who was waiting outside, typing on his phone. Olivia froze in the middle of wiping down the counter. It's complicated. Love usually is, Zoe replied with a knowing smile. But I've never seen you like this. You glow when he's around. Olivia couldn't deny it. Despite the unconventional beginning of their relationship, despite the contract still binding them, despite the 80-day deadline that loomed ever closer, she was falling deeply in love with Alexander Reed. What she didn't know was if he felt the same way. He was attentive, thoughtful, even tender with her, but Alexander was also a businessman who had grown up learning to hide his true feelings. Was this all still part of the arrangement to him? A way to ensure his grandfather remained convinced of their marriage's authenticity? The uncertainty kept Olivia from fully giving in to her feelings, from completely trusting the happiness that seemed to be growing between them. Until the day of the charity gala, exactly 1 month after their wedding. The Reed Family Foundation's annual gala was one of the biggest social events of the season, raising millions for children's education. As the new Mrs. Reed, Olivia would be expected to attend and play her part perfectly. "Are you nervous?" Alexander asked as they rode in the limousine toward the venue, his hand warm around hers. Olivia smoothed the skirt of her emerald green gown, a designer piece Alexander had insisted on having made for her despite her protests about the cost. "A little," she admitted. "This is the first time we'll be appearing in public as a couple in front of so many people." "You'll be wonderful," he assured her, bringing her hand to his lips. "Just be yourself." "The baker from a small town?" she asked with a self-deprecating laugh. "I'm not sure that will impress your social circle." Alexander's expression grew serious. "You built a business from nothing through hard work and talent. That's far more impressive than being born into wealth or marrying into it." He squeezed her hand. "Besides, I'm proud to have you on my arm tonight." The sincerity in his voice bolstered her confidence, and when they arrived at the gala, Olivia held her head high as flashbulbs popped around them. Alexander kept his hand at the small of her back, a reassuring presence as they made their way inside. The ballroom was stunning, decorated in silver and blue, with crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over the gathered crowd. Olivia recognized several faces from magazines and television. Celebrities, politicians, titans of industry, all mingling and chatting as waiters circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. "Alexander," a woman's voice called out, high and melodious. A stunning blonde in a sleek red dress approached them, air-kissing Alexander's cheeks before turning curious eyes to Olivia. "This must be the mysterious wife we've all been hearing about." "Olivia, this is Claire Westfield," Alexander introduced them. "An old family friend. Claire, my wife, Olivia." "Charmed," Claire said, though her smile didn't reach her eyes as she assessed Olivia. "Such a whirlwind romance. The society pages are buzzing with speculation about how you two met." "Sometimes you just know," Alexander said smoothly, his arm sliding around Olivia's waist possessively. "Indeed," Claire's gaze lingered on Alexander. "Though some of us thought you were still enjoying the bachelor life after our arrangement fell through last year." Olivia felt a tightening in her chest. So Claire was more than a family friend, she was an ex. And from the way the blonde was looking at Alexander, perhaps not entirely an ex in her own mind. "That was a business discussion, not an arrangement," Alexander corrected her firmly. "And certainly not relevant tonight." Claire's perfect eyebrows arched. "Of course. Silly me." She turned to Olivia with a practiced smile. "I hear you own a little bakery? How quaint." Before Olivia could respond, Alexander cut in. "Sweet Beginnings is one of the most innovative bakeries in the city. In fact, they're providing the desserts tonight." Olivia's head whipped toward him in surprise. "What?" Alexander smiled down at her. "I wanted it to be a surprise. The foundation ordered your signature maple pecan tarts and raspberry rose macarons for the dessert course." "But I didn't prepare anything," Olivia said, panic rising in her throat. "Zoe handled it all," Alexander assured her. "She said you'd had the recipes perfected for weeks." Claire watched this exchange with narrowed eyes. "Well, I'll be sure to try one later. If you'll excuse me, I see the mayor has arrived." With one last lingering look at Alexander, she glided away. An old friend? Olivia couldn't help asking once Claire was out of earshot. Alexander sighed. "My grandfather tried to arrange a match between us last year. Claire's father owns shipping companies that would have been strategic acquisitions. But there was never anything between us." Olivia nodded, trying not to show how much the revelation had rattled her. Of course there had been other women in Alexander's life, beautiful, sophisticated women who understood his world. What could he possibly see in her beyond the terms of their contract? The evening progressed with Alexander introducing her to countless people, his hand never leaving the small of her back, his eyes constantly seeking hers across crowded conversations. Despite her lingering insecurities, Olivia found herself enjoying the evening, especially when guests began complimenting the desserts. "These tarts are divine," an older woman in diamonds exclaimed. "Who is your caterer, Alexander?" "My wife's bakery, actually," Alexander replied, and the pride in his voice made Olivia's heart skip. "She's the talent behind Sweet Beginnings." As the night went on, Olivia noticed Gerald Reed watching them from across the room, his shrewd eyes missing nothing. When it came time for Alexander to give his speech as the foundation's chairman, Gerald approached Olivia at their table. "He's different with you," the old man said without preamble, nodding toward Alexander who stood at the podium, commanding the room's attention. "More like his father." Olivia wasn't sure how to respond. "Is that good or bad?" A ghost of a smile touched Gerald's lips. "His father was a better man than I. More balanced. He understood that there's more to life than just business." He fixed Olivia with a penetrating stare. "I thought Alexander was just like me, driven, focused solely on success. But when he looks at you..." The old man trailed off, then cleared his throat. "Well, perhaps I was wrong about him. And about your marriage." Before Olivia could process this surprising admission, applause broke out as Alexander concluded his speech. As he made his way back to their table, his eyes locked with hers, and the love she saw there took her breath away. That night, when they returned to the penthouse, Alexander walked Olivia to her bedroom door as had become their custom. But this time, when he leaned down to kiss her goodnight, she didn't let him pull away. "Stay with me tonight," she whispered against his lips, her heart pounding. Alexander searched her face. "Are you sure?" In answer, Olivia took his hand and led him into her room, closing the door behind them. This time, when they came together, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty, only the sweet discovery of two people falling in love. Afterward, as they lay tangled in the sheets, Alexander traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "I have something to tell you," he said softly. Olivia propped herself up on one elbow to look at him, suddenly worried. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about the contract," he began, and Olivia felt her heart sink. Was this the moment he reminded her that their arrangement was temporary? That despite the intimacy they had just shared, there was still an end date? "I want to tear it up," Alexander continued, his gray eyes serious in the dim light. "I don't want an 80-day wife, Olivia. I want a forever wife. I want you." For a moment, Olivia couldn't speak, afraid she had misheard him. "What are you saying?" Alexander sat up, taking her hands in his. "I'm saying I love you. I'm saying I want our marriage to be real, not because of my grandfather's will or your bakery's finances, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it." Tears filled Olivia's eyes. "Alexander. You don't have to answer now," he said quickly. "I know this started as a business arrangement, and I'm springing this on you. But I needed you to know how I feel. The choice is yours, Olivia. No pressure, no expectations." Olivia looked at this man who had entered her life so unexpectedly, who had seen her strength and her vulnerability and cherished both. A man who understood her dreams and supported them, who had shown her parts of himself that he kept hidden from the world. "I love you too," she whispered, the words coming from the deepest part of her heart. "I have for weeks now." The smile that broke across Alexander's face was like the sun emerging from behind clouds. He gathered her in his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that spoke volumes of his feelings. "So what happens now?" Olivia asked when they finally broke apart. "Now," Alexander said, his eyes twinkling, "we have 50 more days to enjoy being newlyweds. And then, if you're willing, we start our real life together." As Olivia curled against Alexander's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, she marveled at how a contract that was supposed to be just business had led her to the greatest love of her life. The honeymoon phase of Olivia and Alexander's newly acknowledged love lasted precisely 2 weeks and 3 days before reality intruded in the form of Claire Westfield. Olivia was at the bakery experimenting with a new recipe for lemon lavender scones, when the bell above the door jingled. Looking up with her customary smile, she froze at the sight of the elegant blonde from the charity gala. "Mrs. Reed," Claire greeted her, the formal address somehow sounding like an insult on her perfectly painted lips. "Claire," Olivia replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "What can I help you with?" Claire surveyed the quaint bakery with barely concealed disdain before her eyes settled back on Olivia. "I thought we should have a chat, woman to woman." "I'm quite busy," Olivia gestured to the half-mixed dough before her. "This won't take long," Claire insisted, sliding onto a stool at the counter. "I just thought you should know what you're getting into with Alexander." Olivia's guard rose immediately. I think I know my husband quite well. Claire's laugh was brittle. Do you? Did he tell you that we were practically engaged last year? That we had an understanding until his grandfather threw in that ridiculous marriage clause in his will? He mentioned that his grandfather tried to arrange something between you, Olivia said carefully. But he also said there was never anything between you. Men often rewrite history to suit their current circumstances, Claire replied with a pitying smile. Alexander and I have history going back years. We belong in the same world. We understand each other. Her eyes narrowed. You're a temporary diversion, darling. A means to an end. The words stung, hitting too close to Olivia's lingering insecurities. I think you should leave. Gladly, Claire stood, smoothing her designer skirt. But first, a friendly warning. Alexander might be playing house with you now, but when the 80 days are up and he has control of the company, don't be surprised if things suddenly change. The blood drained from Olivia's face. How do you know about the 80 days? Claire's smile was triumphant. Like I said, Alexander and I understand each other. We talk. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the counter. When you need a shoulder to cry on, call me. I don't blame you for falling for him. Alexander can be very convincing when he wants something. After Claire left, Olivia stared at the business card until Zoe arrived for her shift and found her still standing there, the scone dough forgotten. What happened? Zoe asked, alarmed by Olivia's pale face. You look like you've seen a ghost. Just a reminder that fairy tales don't usually happen to people like me, Olivia replied, tossing Claire's card into the trash. That evening, when Alexander returned home from work, Olivia was waiting in the living room, Claire's words still echoing in her mind. Hey, Alexander greeted her with a smile, leaning down to kiss her. He frowned when she turned her face slightly, causing his lips to land on her cheek instead of her mouth. Everything okay? I had an interesting visitor at the bakery today, Olivia said, trying to keep her voice casual. Claire Westfield. Alexander's expression darkened. What did she want? To warn me that I'm a temporary diversion, Olivia replied, watching his reaction carefully. She seems to think you two have some sort of understanding. That's ridiculous. Alexander ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Claire and I were never a couple. But you've talked to her about the 80-day contract, Olivia pressed. She knew the exact terms. Alexander sat beside her on the couch, taking her hands in his. I didn't tell her anything, Olivia. But my grandfather might have. He was pushing hard for a match between our families last year. So there's no other explanation? No late-night confidences between old friends. The insecurity in her voice was evident even to her own ears. Alexander's eyes softened. The only person I've shared confidences with lately is you. He squeezed her hands. Claire is part of my past, a past I'm not particularly proud of. She represents the life I was expected to live, marrying for business advantages, continuing the Reed legacy of putting profits above personal happiness. And I represent what? Olivia asked quietly. Rebellion against your grandfather? You represent freedom, Alexander said without hesitation. The freedom to choose my own path, to love someone for who they are rather than what they can bring to a business deal. He cupped her face gently. What I feel for you is real, Olivia. More real than anything I've ever felt. Olivia wanted desperately to believe him, but Claire's visit had shaken her confidence. It's just, sometimes I wonder what you see in me. I'm so different from your world. That's exactly what I love about you, Alexander said, his thumb brushing her cheek. You're authentic, passionate about what you do, unimpressed by wealth or status. You see me, the real me, not the Reed name or fortune. His sincerity was evident in every word, every touch, and Olivia felt her doubts begin to recede. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have let her get to me. Don't apologize, Alexander pulled her into his arms. Claire has always been manipulative. I should have warned you that she might try something like this. As Olivia rested her head against Alexander's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, she pushed Claire's warnings to the back of her mind. What she and Alexander had found together was worth fighting for, worth believing in, even if it had started as a business arrangement. What neither of them knew was that across town, Claire Westfield was meeting with Gerald Reed in his study. Are you certain? The old man asked, his bushy eyebrows drawn together in concern. Positive, Claire replied, satisfaction evident in her voice. I saw the contract myself. Alexander is paying her $2 million for 80 days of marriage. It's all a sham to satisfy the terms of your will. Gerald's weathered face showed no reaction, though inside, disappointment coursed through him. He had hoped, especially after seeing them together at the gala, that he had been wrong about Alexander's motives. "What do you intend to do about it?" Claire pressed when the old man remained silent. "That remains to be seen," Gerald replied cryptically. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Claire." After showing her out, Gerald returned to his study and poured himself a generous glass of scotch. The situation required careful consideration. If Alexander was indeed entering a fake marriage just to gain control of the company sooner, it confirmed Gerald's worst fears about his grandson, that he had raised a man who prioritized business success above all else, just as Gerald himself had done. Yet there had been moments at the gala, watching Alexander with the baker girl, when Gerald had allowed himself to hope that Alexander had found what Gerald and his late wife had shared, a genuine partnership based on love and mutual respect. Perhaps a test was in order, one that would reveal once and for all whether Alexander's marriage was merely a business transaction or something more. The next morning, Alexander was surprised to receive a call from his grandfather requesting an immediate meeting. As he entered Gerald's office, he found the old man standing by the window, looking out at the city skyline. "Grandfather," Alexander greeted him. "What's this about?" Gerald turned, his expression unreadable. "I've been reconsidering the terms of my will." Alexander tensed. "In what way?" "I'm thinking of extending the marriage requirement from 80 days to 1 year before you can take full control of the company," Gerald said, watching his grandson's reaction carefully. Alexander's jaw tightened, but to Gerald's surprise he didn't immediately protest. "May I ask why?" "Call it an old man's caution," Gerald replied. "I want to ensure that you're truly committed to this marriage, not just using it as a means to an end." "I see," Alexander said, his tone measured. "And what about the Clayton merger?" "It won't wait a year. Sometimes business opportunities must be sacrificed for more important considerations," Gerald said, deliberately baiting him. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, and Gerald waited for the explosion of anger, the accusations, the negotiation that would reveal his grandson's true priorities. Instead, Alexander simply nodded. "If that's your decision, grandfather, I'll respect it. The merger is important, but not at the expense of rushing things with Olivia." Gerald couldn't hide his surprise. "You're not going to fight me on this?" A small smile played at the corners of Alexander's mouth. "Would it make a difference if I did?" "It might," Gerald admitted. "If you could convince me that your marriage to the baker is genuine." "Her name is Olivia," Alexander corrected him, a protective edge to his voice that Gerald hadn't heard before. "And our marriage is our business, not yours or the board's or anyone else's." Gerald studied his grandson, seeing echoes of his own son, Alexander's father, in the set of his jaw and the conviction in his eyes. "You really care for her, don't you?" "I love her," Alexander stated simply. "I didn't expect to, but I do. So change the will if you feel you must, grandfather. Extend it to a year, 2 years, it doesn't matter. Olivia and I are in this for the long haul." As Alexander left the office, Gerald sat heavily in his chair, a mixture of emotions washing over him. Relief that his grandson had found something genuine in a world of calculated business moves. Regret for his own role in making Alexander feel that business success was the only measure of a man's worth. And concern that the contract Claire had mentioned might yet drive a wedge between Alexander and the woman who had clearly captured his heart. Meanwhile, Alexander returned to the penthouse in a thoughtful mood. His grandfather's threat to extend the marriage requirement didn't worry him, not anymore. What concerned him was the timing of it, coming right after Claire's visit to Olivia. It seemed too coincidental to be chance. He found Olivia in the kitchen, frosting cupcakes for a special order. The sight of her, focused on her work, a smudge of frosting on her cheek, filled him with a rush of tenderness. "Hey," he said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Those look amazing." Olivia leaned back against him, smiling. "They're for a 6-year-old's birthday party. Unicorn theme." Alexander pressed a kiss to her temple. "I had an interesting meeting with my grandfather today." "Oh." Olivia turned in his arms, curiosity in her eyes. "He's threatening to extend the marriage requirement to a full year," Alexander told her, watching her reaction carefully. Surprise flickered across Olivia's face, followed by something else, uncertainty perhaps. "What does that mean for us? For the contract?" The question stung, reminding Alexander that despite the love they had professed, the contract still loomed between them. "It doesn't have to change anything. Unless. Olivia prompted when he didn't continue. Alexander took a deep breath. "Unless you want out. The original deal was for 80 days. I wouldn't hold you to anything beyond that if you don't want to stay. Olivia looked down, her fingers fidgeting with the spatula she still held. And what do you want? I told you 2 weeks ago, Alexander said gently, tilting her chin up so she would meet his eyes. I want you. For as long as you'll have me. The vulnerability in his gaze made Olivia's heart ache. This powerful man, who commanded boardrooms and managed billion-dollar deals, was laying his heart bare before her, asking without words if she could love him beyond the confines of their original agreement. I want that too, she whispered, and the joy that lit up Alexander's face was all the confirmation she needed that her heart wasn't mistaken. As they sealed their renewed commitment with a kiss, neither was aware that their love would soon be tested in ways they couldn't imagine, by not only Claire's manipulations and Gerald's suspicions but also by the very contract that had brought them together in the first place. The morning of their 50th day of marriage dawned bright and clear, sunlight streaming through the penthouse windows as Olivia stretched lazily in bed. Alexander's side was already empty, but the pillow still held the indent of his head, and she could hear the shower running in the ensuite bathroom. So much had changed in the 7 weeks since their wedding day. What had begun as a cold business arrangement had blossomed into the deepest love Olivia had ever known. Alexander had become not just her husband in name, but her partner, her confidant, her lover. They had settled into a comfortable routine together, sharing meals, discussing their days, and falling asleep in each other's arms. The shower shut off, and moments later Alexander emerged with a towel wrapped around his waist, droplets of water still clinging to his broad shoulders. Despite the familiarity that had grown between them, the sight of him still made Olivia's heart race. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, leaning down to kiss her. "Sleep well." Olivia hummed contentedly. "Though someone kept me up rather late." Alexander's grin was unrepentant as he began dressing for work. "I have a breakfast meeting with the Clayton Group, but I should be home by 6. Dinner together?" "Perfect," Olivia replied, watching him transform from her affectionate husband into the formidable CEO of Reed Enterprises as he donned his suit and tie. "I'll try that new recipe we talked about." After Alexander left, Olivia got ready for her own day at the bakery. Business had been booming since the charity gala, with new customers streaming in daily after hearing about Sweet Beginnings desserts at the event. She had even hired 2 new assistants to help Zoe manage the increased demand. As she gathered her things to leave, Olivia noticed a folder on Alexander's desk that hadn't been there the night before. Normally she wouldn't pry into his business papers, but something caught her eye, her own name printed on the tab of the folder. Hesitating only briefly, Olivia opened it to find their original marriage contract inside, the pages marked with sticky notes and highlighting. Why would Alexander be reviewing the contract now? Was he reconsidering their arrangement despite his declarations of love? Before she could look more closely, her phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. "SOS at the bakery. Delivery truck broke down with wedding cake inside. Need you ASAP." Hurriedly closing the folder and replacing it exactly as she had found it, Olivia pushed her concerns aside and rushed to handle the bakery crisis. The day proved to be one disaster after another. After arranging a replacement vehicle for the stranded wedding cake, the commercial mixer broke down in the middle of a large batch of dough, and then a pipe burst in the bathroom, flooding part of the kitchen. By the time Olivia finally made it home, it was past 7, and she was exhausted, her earlier concerns about the contract temporarily forgotten. She found Alexander in the kitchen, attempting to cook dinner himself, a sight that normally would have made her laugh, given his limited culinary skills. But tonight, the domesticity of the scene only heightened her anxiety about the contract she had found. "There you are," Alexander greeted her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I was getting worried." "Sorry, it was one of those days," Olivia explained, dropping her bag and slumping onto a bar stool at the counter. "The bakery was determined to fall apart around us." Alexander abandoned his cooking attempt and came to stand beside her, his hand rubbing soothing circles on her back. "That bad, huh?" Olivia nodded, then, unable to contain her anxiety any longer, blurted out, "I saw the contract on your desk this morning." Alexander's hand stilled on her back. "Ah. Why were you looking at it?" Olivia asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Are you having second thoughts about us?" "No, never," Alexander said immediately, turning her stool so she faced him. "I was looking at it because I want to change the terms." Olivia's heart sank. "Change them how?" Instead of answering directly, Alexander took her hands in his. "Do you remember what today is?" Confused by the apparent change of subject, Olivia shook her head. "It's day 50, Alexander said, his gray eyes intent on hers. We're past the halfway point of our original agreement. Oh, Olivia said softly, the significance not lost on her. In just 30 more days the contract would be fulfilled. Alexander would gain control of Reed Enterprises, her bakery would be saved, and technically they could go their separate ways. I don't want to wait until day 80 to decide our future, Alexander continued. I know what I want, Olivia. I want you, not for 80 days, not for a year, but for a lifetime. Relief flooded through her, but confusion remained. Then why were you reviewing the contract? Because of this, Alexander reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black box, opening it to reveal a stunning engagement ring. A oval diamond set in a band of smaller stones that caught the light and scattered it like stars. The contract specifies your payment at the end of our agreement. I want to void that clause. Olivia stared at the ring, then at Alexander, not understanding. You don't want to pay me the $2 million? I don't want our relationship to have anything to do with money, Alexander explained, his voice earnest. I want to tear up the contract completely and start fresh. A real marriage based on love, not business. He dropped to one knee before her, still holding the ring box. Olivia Thompson, will you marry me? Not for a contract, not for 80 days, but forever. Tears filled Olivia's eyes as the full meaning of his gesture became clear. Alexander was offering to release her from the contract, to give up the leverage he had over her financially, to start their relationship anew on equal footing. Yes, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Yes, Alexander, I'll marry you for real. The smile that broke across his face was like the sun emerging from behind clouds as he slipped the ring onto her finger. A perfect fit, as if it had been made for her. I love you, he said, rising to his feet and pulling her into his arms. More than I ever thought possible. As they sealed their new engagement with a kiss, Olivia felt the last of her insecurities melt away. This wasn't about business anymore, wasn't about contracts or millions of dollars. This was about two people who had found each other against all odds and weren't about to let go. What they didn't know as they celebrated their engagement that evening was that across town, events were unfolding that would test their newfound commitment in ways they couldn't imagine. Claire Westfield sat in Gerald Reed's study once again, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently on the arm of her chair as the old man read through the document she had brought him. Where did you get this? Gerald asked, looking up from the marriage contract between Alexander and Olivia. I have my sources, Claire replied smugly. The important thing is that it proves what I told you. Their marriage is a sham, a business arrangement set to expire in 30 days. Gerald studied the contract thoughtfully. Perhaps originally, he conceded. But that doesn't mean things haven't changed between them. Claire's expression hardened. Are you blind, old man? Your precious grandson is paying that baker $2 million to pretend to be his wife so he can take control of your company faster. Mind your tone, Gerald warned, his voice cold. You forget who you're speaking to. Claire composed herself with visible effort. I apologize. I'm just concerned that Alexander is being taken advantage of. This woman is clearly a gold digger. Gerald's shrewd eyes assessed Claire. And your interest in this matter is purely out of concern for my grandson, I suppose? It has nothing to do with the fact that if this marriage fails, you might position yourself as a more suitable candidate for the Reed family. A flush colored Claire's cheeks, but she didn't deny the accusation. My family shipping business would be a valuable addition to Reed Enterprises, she said instead. It would be a sensible match. Yes, Gerald mused, very sensible. But I've lived long enough to know that the most sensible path isn't always the right one. He closed the contract and handed it back to Claire. Thank you for bringing this to my attention, but I'll handle matters from here. After Claire left, frustration evident in every line of her body, Gerald poured himself a drink and stood by the window, contemplating his next move. The contract was damning evidence that the marriage had begun as a business deal, but it didn't tell the whole story. He had seen the way Alexander looked at Olivia at the gala, with the same devotion Gerald himself had once felt for his late wife. No, there was more to this situation than met the eye. And before he made any decisions that would affect his grandson's future, Gerald Reed intended to discover the truth for himself. The next morning, Olivia was surprised to receive a call from Gerald's assistant, requesting her presence for lunch at his club that afternoon, alone. Alexander was away at meetings all day, so she couldn't consult with him, but the request seemed innocent enough, if unexpected. As she was shown to Gerald's private dining room at the exclusive Manhattan club, Olivia couldn't help feeling like she was being led to an interrogation rather than a lunch date. The old man rose when she entered, his formal manners impeccable as always. Olivia, thank you for joining me, he greeted her, helping her into her chair before resuming his seat. I hope you don't mind the short notice. Not at all, Olivia replied, smoothing her napkin across her lap and hoping her nervousness wasn't apparent. Though I confess I was surprised by the invitation. Gerald studied her for a moment before speaking. I'll come straight to the point. I've seen the contract between you and my grandson. Olivia felt the blood drain from her face. I see. $2 million for 80 days of marriage, Gerald continued, his voice neutral. Quite a business arrangement. Olivia swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. Should she deny it? Try to explain? Before she could decide, Gerald spoke again. What I want to know is this, was it all pretend? The way you look at him, the way you are together, is that part of what he's paying you for? The accusation stung and Olivia felt her spine straighten. No, she said firmly. That was never part of the arrangement. Then what was? Gerald pressed. Olivia took a deep breath, deciding that honesty was her only option. The original agreement was simple. I would marry Alexander for 80 days to satisfy the terms of your will. He would get control of the company, and I would get enough money to save my bakery from foreclosure. We would appear as a happily married couple in public, then quietly divorce once the terms were met. Gerald's expression gave nothing away. And now. Olivia looked down at the engagement ring sparkling on her finger, the one Alexander had given her just the night before. Now we're planning to stay married. For real. Because of the money? Gerald asked bluntly. Olivia's head snapped up, her eyes flashing. No. Because somewhere along the way we fell in love. In fact, Alexander wants to void the financial part of the contract entirely. He asked me to marry him again last night, not for business but for love. Gerald's bushy eyebrows rose in surprise. He's willing to give up the $2 million payment? And I'm willing to give up taking it, Olivia said firmly. What we have found together is worth more than any amount of money. A long silence followed as Gerald considered her words, his shrewd eyes assessing her sincerity. Finally, he nodded once as if coming to a decision. My son, Alexander's father, married for love, he said, his voice softer than Olivia had ever heard it. I thought he was making a mistake. His bride brought no business advantages, no strategic alliances. But theirs was the happiest marriage I've ever witnessed. A shadow of regret crossed the old man's face. I didn't understand it then. Perhaps I'm beginning to now. Olivia remained silent, sensing that Gerald was speaking as much to himself as to her. Alexander is a good man, Gerald continued after a moment. Better than I gave him credit for, it seems. And you, my dear, are clearly more than just a baker with financial troubles. Thank you. Olivia said uncertainly, not sure if she was being complimented or not. A rare smile curved Gerald's lips. It was indeed a compliment. Now shall we order? I hear the Dover sole is excellent here. As they continued their lunch, the conversation turned to more neutral topics, but Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that she had just passed some sort of test. What she didn't know was whether the results would help or hinder her future with Alexander. She would find out soon enough. Alexander knew something was wrong the moment he returned to the penthouse that evening. Olivia was sitting on the couch, still in her work clothes, her expression troubled as she stared out at the darkening city skyline. Olivia? He called softly, setting down his briefcase. What's wrong? She looked up, momentary relief crossing her face at the sight of him before worry returned. Your grandfather invited me to lunch today. Alexander tensed. What did he want? He knows about the contract, Olivia said simply. He's seen it. Alexander closed his eyes briefly, a muscle in his jaw twitching. Claire? He muttered. It had to be her. That would be my guess, Olivia agreed, rising from the couch to stand before him. Alexander, he asked me if our relationship was part of what you were paying me for. Anger flashed in Alexander's eyes. He had no right to imply that. No, he didn't, Olivia agreed, taking his hands in hers. But I told him the truth, that what started as a business arrangement has become something real. I told him about last night, about you wanting to void the payment clause, about us wanting to stay married. Alexander's anger softened slightly. How did he react? It was hard to tell, Olivia admitted. You know how he is, all stoic and unreadable. But I think he might have been pleased, actually. He talked about your parents' marriage, about how your father married for love instead of business advantage. Alexander looked surprised. He's never spoken to me about that. He said their marriage was the happiest he'd ever seen, Olivia continued, watching Alexander's face as she spoke. He seemed almost regretful, like he wished he had understood it better at the time. Alexander pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. I'm sorry you had to face him alone. I should have been there. I handled it, Olivia said, her voice muffled against his chest. But what happens now? Will he extend the terms of the will? Try to invalidate our marriage? I don't know, Alexander admitted, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. But whatever he does, we'll face it together. The contract doesn't matter anymore, Olivia. All that matters is that I love you and I want to build a life with you. The certainty in his voice calmed the last of Olivia's fears. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would overcome them together. Later that night, as they lay in bed, Alexander's phone rang. Checking the screen, he frowned. It's grandfather, he said, sitting up and answering the call. Olivia watched his face carefully as he listened, trying to gauge the conversation from his terse responses. Yes, sir. I understand. 9 o'clock. We'll be there. When he hung up, Alexander turned to Olivia with a grave expression. He wants to see us both tomorrow morning. At the company offices. That doesn't sound good, Olivia said, anxiety creeping back into her voice. No, it doesn't, Alexander agreed, pulling her close. But whatever he has planned, remember this, you're my choice, Olivia. Contract or no contract, inheritance or no inheritance, you're the woman I want to spend my life with. Olivia snuggled into his embrace, drawing strength from his conviction. And you're mine, she whispered. No matter what happens tomorrow. The Reed Enterprises headquarters was imposing in the morning light as Alexander and Olivia entered the lobby hand in hand. Employees nodded respectfully as they passed, and Olivia couldn't help wondering how many of them suspected the truth about their whirlwind marriage. Gerald was waiting for them in the boardroom, seated at the head of the long table with several folders arranged neatly before him. His expression was unreadable as they entered, though his eyes lingered on their clasped hands. Alexander, Olivia? He greeted them, gesturing to the chairs on his right. Thank you for coming. Did we have a choice? Alexander asked as they sat down, his tone more resigned than defiant. Gerald's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. There's always a choice, grandson. That's a lesson I've been slow to learn. Before Alexander could respond, the boardroom door opened again, and Claire Westfield swept in, looking triumphant in a tailored red suit. What is she doing here? Alexander demanded, half rising from his chair. Ms. Westfield has information relevant to our discussion, Gerald replied calmly. Please sit down, Alexander. Reluctantly, Alexander complied, his hand tightening around Olivia's. Gerald pushed one of the folders toward them. This is the contract between you and Olivia, he began, his voice matter-of-fact. A contract that violates the spirit, if not the letter, of my will's stipulations. Claire's smile was smug as she took a seat across from them, clearly expecting Gerald to denounce their arrangement. The terms are quite clear, Gerald continued, opening the folder. Olivia agreed to marry you for 80 days in exchange for $2 million. You gained a temporary wife to satisfy my will. She gained financial security for her business. He closed the folder and fixed Alexander with a penetrating stare. Not exactly the basis for a lasting marriage. With respect, grandfather, Alexander began, his voice tight with controlled anger, what began as a business arrangement has become something more. Olivia and I. Gerald held up a hand, silencing him. I'm well aware of what you and Olivia claim to have found together. The question is whether I believe it. It's the truth, Olivia said quietly but firmly. We fell in love. How convenient, Claire interjected, her voice dripping with disdain. Just in time to convince the old man to hand over the company. That's enough, Claire, Gerald said sharply. You've made your point. He turned back to Alexander and Olivia, his expression softening slightly. I've watched you both carefully these past weeks. At the gala in particular. The way you look at each other, the way you interact. It reminds me of another couple I once knew. My parents, Alexander said softly. Gerald nodded. Your father was much like you, Alexander, driven, intelligent, a natural leader. But he understood something I never did until it was too late, that a life devoted solely to business is a hollow one. Claire shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly not expecting this turn in the conversation. When Robert met your mother, I was furious, Gerald continued, a distant look in his eyes. She was a kindergarten teacher with no family connections, no business acumen. I thought he was throwing away his future for a pretty face. But they were happy, Alexander said, the word somewhere between a question and a statement. Deliriously so, Gerald confirmed with a small smile. In the years they had together before the accident, they showed me what a true partnership could be. Something I never had with your grandmother for all our years together. He turned his gaze to Olivia. You remind me of her, Catherine. Not in looks but in spirit. The way you stand your ground, the way you see beyond the Reed name and fortune to the man behind it. Olivia didn't know what to say, touched and surprised by the comparison. Gerald pushed another folder forward. This is an amended version of my will. I've decided to remove the marriage clause entirely. Alexander blinked in surprise. What? You've proven yourself a capable leader these past years, Alexander. The company is thriving under your management. You no longer need my oversight or my conditions to take full control. Claire's face had gone pale with shock. Gerald, you can't be serious. After I brought you proof of their deception. What you brought me, Gerald interrupted firmly, was confirmation of how their arrangement began, not of where it stands now. He looked pointedly at the engagement ring on Olivia's finger. Some things can't be faked, Claire. The way they look at each other is one of them. Alexander stared at his grandfather, stunned by this unexpected turn of events. The company is mine? Just like that. Just like that, Gerald confirmed. Effective immediately. Though I will retain my position on the board if you'll have me. Of course, Alexander said automatically, still processing the news. Gerald pushed a third folder forward. And this is for you, Olivia. Cautiously, Olivia opened it to find a check for $2 million, the amount promised in her contract with Alexander. She looked up in confusion. The contract stipulated payment after 80 days, Gerald explained. Consider this an early fulfillment of those terms with no strings attached. What you and Alexander decide to do with your marriage going forward is entirely up to you. Olivia stared at the check, then at Alexander, uncertainty in her eyes. It's your choice, my dear, Gerald said gently. Take the money and end the arrangement as planned, or tear up the check and the contract both. Either way, Alexander gets the company. Claire stood abruptly, her face flushed with anger. This is absurd. You're being manipulated by a gold digger and her sob story about a failing bakery. The only one attempting manipulation here is you, Claire, Gerald replied coolly. And I suggest you leave before you say something you'll regret professionally. Reed Enterprises still does considerable business with your father's company after all. With a final glare at Alexander and Olivia, Claire stormed out of the boardroom, the door slamming behind her. Gerald turned back to the young couple. Well, what will it be? Alexander looked at Olivia, love and absolute trust in his eyes. It's your decision, Olivia. Whatever you choose, I'll support you. Olivia held his gaze for a long moment, then turned to the check in her hands. Without hesitation, she tore it in half, then in quarters. I don't want your money, Mr. Reed, she said, dropping the pieces onto the table. I only want your grandson. Alexander's face lit up with joy and pride as he pulled her into his arms, kissing her soundly right there in the boardroom, heedless of his grandfather's presence. Gerald watched them with a smile that held equal parts satisfaction and wistfulness. Well, that settles that, he said, gathering up the torn check. I'll have the legal department draw up new paperwork transferring control of the company to you immediately, Alexander. As the old man stood to leave, Alexander stopped him with a hand on his arm. Thank you, grandfather. Not just for the company but for understanding. Gerald patted his hand awkwardly, and used to displays of affection. Perhaps we can all have dinner next week. I'd like to get to know my granddaughter-in-law better, the real Olivia, not the contract wife. We'd like that, Alexander said, his arms still around Olivia's waist. After Gerald left, Alexander turned to Olivia, his expression serious despite the joy still evident in his eyes. Are you sure about this? That was $2 million you just tore up. I've never been more sure of anything, Olivia replied, cupping his face in her hands. Money comes and goes, Alexander. What we have is priceless. As they left the Reed Enterprises building together, hand in hand, neither of them noticed Claire Westfield watching from her car across the street, her expression cold with fury and calculation. She wasn't about to give up so easily, not when the stakes were so high. Alexander Reed was the ultimate prize in Manhattan's elite circles, and she had been groomed since childhood to be the perfect corporate wife. That little baker had no idea what she was up against. The game wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. The next 3 weeks were the happiest of Olivia's life. With the contract torn up and Gerald's blessing secured, she and Alexander were free to enjoy their relationship without the shadow of business hanging over them. They began planning a proper wedding ceremony to renew their vows, a real celebration with family and friends, not the hurried civil service of their original arrangement. Sweet Beginnings was thriving, with the publicity from the charity gala bringing in new customers daily. Olivia had hired more staff and was even considering opening a second location. The irony wasn't lost on her that she had entered the contract with Alexander to save her bakery, only to find that love had brought her more success than money ever could. Alexander, too, was flourishing in his new role as full CEO of Reed Enterprises. With his grandfather's support rather than scrutiny, he was able to finalize the Clayton merger that had been in the works for months. The stock price soared, and business publications were hailing him as one of the most innovative young executives in the country. Gerald had become a regular visitor to their penthouse, slowly warming to Olivia and developing a genuine fondness for her straight-talking manner and kind heart. He had even started sharing stories about Alexander's parents, stories that Alexander himself had never heard, painting a picture of the loving family he might have had if not for the tragic accident. Everything was perfect, which should have been Olivia's first clue that trouble was brewing. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, an elegant cream envelope addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Alexander Reed. Inside was a card inviting them to the annual Westfield Foundation Gala, hosted by none other than Claire Westfield and her family. "We don't have to go," Alexander said when Olivia showed him the invitation that evening. "After everything Claire has done, no one would expect us to attend." "That's exactly why we should go," Olivia replied, surprising herself with her own determination. "She's expecting us to decline, to hide away. I won't give her the satisfaction." Alexander studied her for a moment, a smile playing at his lips. "Have I told you lately how much I love you?" "Not in the last hour," Olivia teased, leaning in for a kiss. "You're incredible," Alexander murmured against her lips. Most women would be intimidated by Claire and her social circle. "Oh, I'm terrified," Olivia admitted with a small laugh. "But I'm also tired of feeling like I don't belong in your world. If I'm going to be Mrs. Reed for real, I need to face people like Claire head-on." Alexander's expression softened with pride and love. "You belong anywhere you want to be, Olivia. And you'll have me beside you every step of the way." The night of the gala arrived, and Olivia found herself standing before the mirror in their bedroom, assessing her reflection critically. The dress Alexander had surprised her with was stunning. A deep blue gown that hugged her curves before flowing gracefully to the floor, with delicate silver embroidery that caught the light when she moved. "You look breathtaking," Alexander said, appearing in the doorway in his tuxedo, his gray eyes dark with appreciation. "I feel like I'm going into battle," Olivia confessed, smoothing the fabric nervously. "With you looking like that, I almost feel sorry for Claire," Alexander said, offering his arm with a reassuring smile. "Almost." The Westfield mansion was ablaze with lights as they pulled up, camera flashes going off as photographers recognized the Reed limousine. In the months since their wedding, Alexander and Olivia had become fixtures in the society pages, their whirlwind romance, a subject of endless fascination. "Ready?" Alexander asked as the driver opened their door. Olivia took a deep breath and nodded, allowing him to help her from the car. With her hand tucked securely in the crook of his arm, they ascended the steps and entered the mansion. The ballroom was crowded with New York's elite, the crème de la crème of society and business. Olivia recognized faces from television, politics, and the covers of business magazines. More wealth and power gathered in one room than she had ever seen. Claire spotted them almost immediately, making her way across the room with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. She wore a striking red gown that seemed designed to draw all attention to her, a stark contrast to Olivia's more elegant attire. "Alexander, Olivia," she greeted them, air-kissing Alexander's cheek and giving Olivia's hand the briefest of squeezes. "How lovely that you could come. I wasn't sure you'd accept the invitation." "We wouldn't miss it," Alexander replied smoothly. "The Westfield Foundation does excellent work." Claire's smile tightened slightly. "Indeed. Though perhaps not as well-funded as the Reed Foundation. Yet." Her gaze slid to Olivia. "That's quite a dress, my dear. Alexander's taste, I presume?" Before Olivia could respond, a handsome man in his 40s approached, placing a possessive hand on Claire's waist. "Alexander Reed," he said, extending his free hand. "I don't believe we've met." "James Harrington." Alexander shook the offered hand, recognition flickering in his eyes. "Harrington Shipping. I've heard good things about your expansion into Asian markets." "All true," James replied with a confident smile. "And this must be the famous Olivia who stole Manhattan's most eligible bachelor right from under Claire's nose." Olivia felt Alexander tense beside her, but she kept her smile in place. "A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Harrington." "James, please," he insisted, his gaze lingering on her a moment too long. "Claire has told me so much about you both." "All good, I'm sure," Alexander said dryly. Claire laughed, a brittle sound. "Of course, darling. James and I have no hard feelings about ancient history, do we?" She looked up at him adoringly. "We're quite happy with how things turned out." James nodded, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Absolutely. Now if you'll excuse us, we should greet the other guests. Enjoy the evening." With a final nod, he led Claire away. "Well, that was unexpected," Olivia murmured as they moved toward the bar. "I didn't realize Claire had moved on so quickly." "James Harrington is one of the city's biggest playboys," Alexander explained, ordering them drinks. "Old money, well-connected, and completely uninterested in commitment." Claire chose him deliberately to make a point. "Which is?" Olivia asked, accepting a glass of champagne. "That she doesn't care about us," Alexander said, though his expression suggested he didn't believe it for a moment. "Claire never does anything without calculation. Having James here tonight is part of some larger plan." Olivia sipped her champagne, scanning the room. "We should separate," she decided suddenly. "Give her the opportunity to approach one of us alone." Alexander frowned. "I don't want to leave you unprotected." "I'm not made of glass, Alexander," Olivia reminded him gently. "Besides, I think she'll go for you, not me. She still believes she can win you back." "There's nothing to win back," Alexander said firmly. "There never was anything between us." "I know that," Olivia assured him. "But Claire doesn't, or won't accept it. Go mingle with the business crowd. I'll be fine." Reluctantly, Alexander agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple before moving toward a group of executives near the windows. Olivia circulated through the room, exchanging pleasantries with those who recognized her from society pages or the charity gala. She was making her way toward the dessert table when James Harrington intercepted her, 2 fresh glasses of champagne in hand. "You look like you could use a refill," he said, offering her one of the glasses. "Thank you," Olivia replied, accepting it with a polite smile. "You and Claire have put together a lovely event." James chuckled, the sound surprisingly warm. "Claire put it together. I just wrote the checks." He gestured to a quieter corner of the room. "Shall we?" Sensing an opportunity to learn more about Claire's intentions, Olivia followed him to a small seating area partially screened by large potted palms. From their vantage point, she could see Alexander across the room, deep in conversation with several men in suits. "So, the baker who captured Alexander Reed's heart," James said, studying her with interest. "You're not what I expected." "I get that a lot," Olivia replied evenly. "What did you expect?" "Someone more calculating," James admitted. "The Reed fortune is no small prize." "I didn't marry Alexander for his money," Olivia said, the truth of the statement hitting her anew as she said it. Despite how their arrangement had begun, money had never been her primary motivation. Even then, it had been about saving her dream, her bakery, not personal gain. "No, I don't think you did," James said, surprising her. "Which makes you unique in this room." He glanced around at the glittering crowd. "Most marriages here are mergers in all but name." "Like yours and Claire's?" Olivia asked boldly, then immediately regretted her directness. "I'm sorry, that was presumptuous." To her surprise, James laughed. "No, you're quite right. Claire and I understand each other. She needs a suitable escort who won't cramp her style. I need an appropriate hostess who won't expect fidelity. It's a perfectly Manhattan arrangement." Olivia frowned slightly. "That sounds rather cold." "It is," James agreed without hesitation. "But then, not everyone is fortunate enough to find what you and Reed have." His expression turned serious. "Which is why I feel obligated to warn you." "Warn me?" Olivia repeated, setting down her champagne glass. "Claire isn't done with Alexander," James said, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "This whole evening, the gala, the invitation, even me, it's all part of her plan." "What plan?" Olivia asked, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew. "To break you two up," James said bluntly. "She still believes Alexander belongs with her. That you're a passing fancy he'll tire of once the novelty wears off." "Why are you telling me this?" Olivia asked, suspicious of his motives. James shrugged, a rueful smile playing at his lips. "Let's just say I've been on the receiving end of Claire's manipulations before, and it wasn't pleasant." He stood, straightening his jacket. "Watch your back tonight, Olivia Reed. And keep an eye on your husband." With that cryptic warning, he melted back into the crowd, leaving Olivia alone with her thoughts and a growing sense of unease. Across the room, Alexander was indeed being approached by Claire, who had detached herself from a group of socialites and made a beeline for him the moment she saw him alone. "Enjoying yourself?" she asked, sidling up beside him at the bar. "It's an impressive event," Alexander acknowledged, keeping his tone neutral. "Harrington seems interesting." Claire laughed, the sound practiced to perfection. "He serves a purpose." She placed a hand on Alexander's arm, leaning in slightly. "Much like your baker did, I imagine." Alexander stiffened, removing her hand firmly but discreetly. "My wife," he corrected, emphasizing the word, "is the woman I love. Not a means to an end." "Of course," Claire said, though her tone suggested she didn't believe him for a second. "Love. How novel." She sipped her champagne, watching him over the rim of her glass. "And when the novelty wears off? When you tire of playing house with someone who doesn't understand your world?" "Olivia understands me better than anyone ever has," Alexander replied, his voice low but intense. "Including you, Claire." A flash of genuine hurt crossed Claire's face before her mask of cool confidence returned. "We'll see about that." She set down her empty glass. "The night is still young, Alexander." Before he could respond, she had disappeared into the crowd again, leaving Alexander with a sense of foreboding. He needed to find Olivia. As he scanned the room for her, a commotion near the main entrance caught his attention. Gerald Reed had arrived, looking distinguished in his tuxedo, to the surprise of many guests. Alexander's grandfather rarely attended social functions these days, preferring the comfort of his home to the noise and pretense of galas. Alexander made his way to his grandfather's side. "I didn't know you were coming tonight," he said, genuinely pleased to see the old man. Gerald clasped his hand warmly. "And miss seeing you and Olivia shine? Where is that remarkable wife of yours?" "I was just looking for her," Alexander admitted, still scanning the crowd. Gerald's bushy eyebrows drew together. "Is everything all right?" "Just Claire being Claire," Alexander replied with a grimace. "I have a feeling she's planning something." Gerald nodded gravely. That young woman never could accept defeat gracefully. Like her father in that regard. He straightened his shoulders. "Well, let's find Olivia and present a united front, shall we?" As they made their way through the crowded ballroom, Alexander spotted Olivia at last, surrounded by a group of society women whose expressions ranged from curiosity to thinly veiled disdain. Claire stood among them, her smile predatory as she watched Olivia field what appeared to be increasingly uncomfortable questions. "And you've really never been to Europe? Not even Paris?" one woman was asking as Alexander and Gerald approached. "I'm afraid my travels have been limited to the East Coast," Olivia replied with dignity, though Alexander could see the tension in her shoulders. "How quaint," another woman remarked. "Claire tells us you worked in a bakery before meeting Alexander. However did you manage the transition to high society? It must be so overwhelming for someone of your background." Before Olivia could respond, Gerald's voice boomed out, "Ah, there's my favorite granddaughter-in-law." The group of women parted like the Red Sea as Gerald Reed made his way to Olivia's side, taking her hand and kissing it with old-world gallantry. "You look stunning tonight, my dear." The talk of the gala, I'm sure. Relief washed over Olivia's face at the sight of him and Alexander. "Mr. Reed, I didn't know you were coming tonight." "Gerald, please," he reminded her with a wink. "And I wouldn't miss it. The Westfield Foundation does excellent work, though not quite as comprehensive as our family's efforts." He glanced around at the now silent society women. "Wouldn't you agree, ladies?" None of them seemed willing to contradict Gerald Reed, and they murmured vague agreements before dispersing quickly, leaving only Claire behind. "Mr. Reed," she greeted him with a tight smile. "What an unexpected pleasure." "Claire?" Gerald nodded coolly. "I was just telling Olivia how proud I am to have her in our family. She's brought a refreshing authenticity to the Reed name." Claire's smile remained fixed, though her eyes hardened. "How fortunate for you all." She glanced at her watch. "If you'll excuse me, I should check on the auction preparations. We're hoping to raise record amounts tonight." As she walked away, Gerald turned to Olivia with concern. "Are you all right, my dear? Those vultures can be vicious." "I'm fine," Olivia assured him, though her hand trembled slightly as Alexander took it in his. "Just a little out of my depth." "Nonsense," Gerald declared firmly. "You handled yourself with more grace than any of them have ever shown. Now shall we find our table? I believe dinner is about to be served." As they followed Gerald toward the dining area, Alexander wrapped an arm around Olivia's waist, pulling her close. I'm sorry, he whispered. I shouldn't have left you alone. It's not your fault, Olivia replied, leaning into his strength. Besides, I learned something interesting. James Harrington warned me that Claire is planning something tonight, something to break us up. Alexander's jaw tightened. We won't let that happen. No, Olivia agreed, her determination returning. We won't. What they didn't realize was that Claire's plan was already in motion, and the final act was set to unfold during dinner, a test that would push their newfound love to its limits. Dinner was an elaborate affair, with courses paired with expensive wines and conversation that flowed as freely as the alcohol. Olivia found herself seated between Alexander and Gerald, with James Harrington directly across from her and Claire at the far end of the long table, presiding over the gathering like a queen. Despite the earlier confrontation, the meal progressed pleasantly enough, with Gerald regaling their tablemates with stories from his early days building Reed Enterprises. Olivia began to relax slightly, thinking perhaps Claire's plan had been nothing more than an attempt to rattle her confidence. Then, as dessert was being served, Claire tapped her glass delicately, calling for attention. The room fell silent as she stood, resplendent in her red gown. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming tonight to support the Westfield Foundation's work with underprivileged children, she began, her voice carrying effortlessly through the hushed room. Your generosity will make a tremendous difference in many young lives. Polite applause followed this statement, and Claire smiled graciously before continuing. Before we proceed to the charity auction, I have a special announcement to make, one that I'm sure will delight everyone here. Her gaze fixed on Alexander and Olivia's table. As many of you know, the Reed and Westfield families have long discussed combining our business interests. Tonight, I'm thrilled to announce that those discussions have borne fruit. Alexander stiffened beside Olivia, his expression darkening. What is she doing? He muttered. Claire continued, her smile growing wider. Reed Enterprises and Westfield Shipping will be entering into a historic merger, creating one of the largest conglomerates in the country. The details will be announced formally next week, but I couldn't resist sharing the happy news with our closest friends tonight. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the room as all eyes turned to Alexander, clearly expecting confirmation. Olivia felt a cold knot form in her stomach. There was no merger planned, at least none that Alexander had mentioned to her. Yet Claire spoke with such confidence that doubt began to creep in. Alexander stood slowly, his face a mask of control that Olivia recognized from board meetings and press conferences. His business face revealing nothing of his true feelings. Claire, he began, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority that made people listen. While I appreciate your enthusiasm, I'm afraid you've been misinformed. There is no merger between Reed Enterprises and Westfield Shipping planned or under discussion. Claire's smile didn't falter. Oh, that's not what your grandfather told my father just last week. She turned to Gerald. Mr. Reed, perhaps you'd like to clarify the situation? After all, you're still chairman of the board. All eyes swiveled to Gerald, who regarded Claire with something between amusement and annoyance. My dear, he said, his voice dry, I haven't spoken to your father in over a month, and when I did, the topic was his gout, not a business merger. Titters of laughter broke out around the room, and Claire's smile finally slipped, a flush creeping up her neck. But she wasn't done yet. How strange, she said, recovering quickly. Perhaps it was another arrangement I was thinking of. Her gaze locked with Olivia's, malice glittering in her eyes. Speaking of arrangements, I've been meaning to congratulate you both on your marriage. 80 days and counting, isn't it? Or has the contract been extended now that the company control has been secured? A shocked silence fell over the room. Olivia felt as though all the air had been sucked out of her lungs. Claire had just publicly revealed their initial arrangement, the very thing that could humiliate them both and cast doubt on the authenticity of their relationship. Alexander's hand found hers under the table, squeezing it reassuringly. When he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. You've crossed a line, Claire. Have I? She challenged, her desperation becoming evident as her plan unraveled. Or have I simply revealed the truth? That your whirlwind romance was nothing more than a business transaction to satisfy the terms of your grandfather's will? $2 million for 80 days of marriage. Isn't that the deal, Olivia? All eyes turned to Olivia, awaiting her response. She felt Alexander's tension beside her, Gerald's concern across from her, and the weight of dozens of curious stares. In that moment she knew she had a choice. She could crumble under the pressure, or she could stand firm in the truth of what she and Alexander had found together. Slowly Olivia rose to her feet, her chin held high. Yes, she said clearly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. That was the original arrangement. I won't deny it. Gasps and whispers erupted around the room, and Claire's expression turned triumphant, until Olivia continued. I agreed to marry Alexander for 80 days to help him inherit control of Reed Enterprises sooner, and in return, he offered to save my bakery from financial ruin. She looked around the room, meeting the shocked and judgmental gazes directly. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't honorable. It was business, the kind of arrangement that I suspect many of you in this room would understand perfectly. The whispers died down as people exchanged uncomfortable glances, recognizing the truth in her words. What no one expected, least of all Alexander and I, was that during those 80 days, something real would grow between us. Olivia's gaze softened as she turned to Alexander, whose eyes shone with pride and love. We fell in love. Deeply, completely, unexpectedly in love. She turned back to face Claire and the room at large. 3 weeks ago, I tore up a check for $2 million because no amount of money could ever be worth more to me than the life I'm building with this man. So yes, our marriage began as a contract, but it has become something much more valuable, a true partnership based on love and respect. Alexander stood beside her, taking her hand in his. What my wife says is true, he confirmed, his voice ringing with sincerity. Our beginning was unconventional, but our love is real. And I'm grateful every day that a business arrangement brought this incredible woman into my life. The room was silent for a moment, then Gerald Reed rose to his feet, lifting his champagne glass high. To Alexander and Olivia, he announced in a voice that brooked no argument. May their honesty and courage inspire us all. One by one, the other guests raised their glasses, murmuring the toast, all except Claire, who stood frozen, her plan having backfired spectacularly. Instead of humiliating Olivia and driving a wedge between the couple, she had given them the opportunity to publicly affirm their commitment to each other. James Harrington was the first to break the tension, standing to approach Olivia and Alexander with his glass raised. To love that overcomes all obstacles, he added to the toast, his eyes meeting Claire's for a brief, pointed moment before he turned back to the couple. Well played, Mrs. Reed. As James' endorsement broke the ice, other guests began to approach, some offering congratulations on their honesty, others sharing their own stories of marriages that had begun pragmatically but evolved into deep love. The scandal Claire had hoped to create transformed instead into a celebration of authentic emotion in a world often governed by business interests and social appearances. Claire, seeing her plan crumble around her, slipped away from the gala, her red dress a flash of defeated color as she disappeared into the night. Later, as Alexander and Olivia swayed together on the dance floor, he held her close, his lips near her ear. You were magnificent, he murmured. I've never been prouder to call you my wife. Olivia smiled up at him, her heart full. I just told the truth. Our truth. No more secrets, Alexander agreed, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. No more contracts or arrangements. Just us, building a life together one day at a time. I like the sound of that, Olivia said, resting her head against his chest. Though I have to admit, I'm looking forward to day 81. Alexander chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly beneath her ear. Why's that? Because that's the day our forever officially begins, she replied, lifting her face for his kiss. The day when every moment together is a choice we make freely, not because of any agreement or obligation. Every moment with you is a choice I make gladly, Alexander said softly, his gray eyes serious as they gazed into hers. Contract or no contract, I choose you, Olivia. Today and every day. As they continued to dance beneath the glittering chandeliers, surrounded by the elite of New York society but lost in their own world, Olivia reflected on the strange, twisting path that had led her here. A desperate financial situation. A business proposal from a handsome stranger. A contract marriage that was supposed to last just 80 days. And somehow, against all odds, it had become the love story she had never dared to dream of. Gerald watched them from across the room, a satisfied smile on his weathered face. His plan had worked better than he could have hoped. When Claire had first brought him the contract, his instinct had been to confront Alexander immediately, to demand answers about this deception. But something had held him back, perhaps the memory of his own son's happiness, perhaps a growing wisdom in his old age. Instead, he had watched and waited, testing them in subtle ways. And what he had witnessed was the genuine growth of love between two people who might never have found each other without that initial business arrangement. Sometimes, Gerald reflected, the most unlikely beginnings led to the most perfect endings. As the night wore on, Alexander and Olivia said their goodbyes to Gerald and the remaining guests, eager to return home to the privacy of their penthouse. In the limousine, Alexander pulled Olivia close, her head resting comfortably on his shoulder. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "we never did properly celebrate our engagement." Olivia looked up at him with a tired smile. "Tonight wasn't enough celebration for you?" "I was thinking of something more private," Alexander replied, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Something just for us." When they arrived at the penthouse, Alexander surprised her by scooping her into his arms and carrying her across the threshold, just as he had on their wedding day, though this time there was no awkwardness, no businesslike distance between them. This time, he carried her with the confident tenderness of a man deeply in love. Inside, Olivia gasped at the sight that greeted them. The living room had been transformed, with dozens of candles casting a warm glow and rose petals scattered across the floor. A bottle of champagne chilled in an ice bucket beside the couch, and soft music played from hidden speakers. "When did you arrange all this?" she asked in wonder as Alexander set her gently on her feet. "I have my resources," he replied with a smile, pouring 2 glasses of champagne and handing one to her. "I wanted tonight to be special regardless of how the gala went. A proper beginning for our real life together." Olivia took a sip of champagne, feeling the bubbles dance on her tongue as Alexander raised his glass in a toast. "To my wife," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "The contract may have brought you into my life, but love will keep you there." "To my husband," Olivia responded, touching her glass to his. "Thank you for showing me that some business deals come with unexpected benefits." Alexander laughed, setting down his glass to pull her close. "Speaking of benefits," he murmured, his lips finding the sensitive spot just below her ear. "I believe we have some celebrating to do, Mrs. Reed." Later, as they lay tangled together in their bed, Olivia traced lazy patterns on Alexander's chest, her engagement ring catching the moonlight streaming through the windows. "What are you thinking about?" Alexander asked, his fingers combing gently through her hair. "The future," Olivia replied honestly. "Our future. Sweet Beginnings is doing so well now, and with the second location opening next month." "You're an incredible businesswoman," Alexander said with pride. "I've been meaning to talk to you about that, actually. Reed Enterprises has a culinary division that's been underperforming. I was thinking, with your expertise." Olivia propped herself up on one elbow, suddenly alert. "Are you offering me a job, Mr. Reed?" Alexander shook his head with a smile. "Not a job. A partnership. Your bakeries would remain independent, but with Reed backing you could expand nationally. Maybe even internationally." "Alexander," Olivia breathed, her mind racing with possibilities. "That would be—" "Think about it," he urged, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "There's no rush. We have all the time in the world now." "All the time in the world," Olivia repeated, settling back into his embrace. "I like the sound of that." As sleep began to claim them both, Olivia reflected on the incredible journey of the past 80 days. She had entered a contract marriage expecting nothing more than financial salvation for her bakery. Instead, she had found a love deeper and more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined, a true partner in every sense of the word. The contract that had brought them together was now meaningless, torn up and forgotten in favor of the vows they had made with their hearts. 80 days had been all it took for Olivia Thompson to go from desperate baker to beloved wife, from business arrangement to true love. And as she drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, Olivia knew with absolute certainty that their forever was just beginning.